The Deer Watch by Pat Lowry Collins, illustrated by David Slonim. It was another summer in the house that smelled like old trees, and where the seagulls on the roof believed they owned the place. I didn't mind their noise, because we were here to look for deer. It was the year my dad had promised that I'd get to see a doe or buck at last, and so we planned to get up early the next day. As soon as there were pink streaks in the morning sky, we headed out. In the dunes, the sand slipped underneath our feet and made it hard to climb up to the top. Everything below us looked so small. No speck of deer, just flecks of gull, a buoy like a painted cork, a boat with a moth-wing sail, no deer at all. Next, we looked into the marsh grass where the deer come down to drink or take a bath before most people are awake. We saw a red-winged blackbird and one tall, white, shaggy bird, its neck a question mark. Egret, said my dad. On the road, a bulldozer was moving like a giant snail. It growled and sputtered, so we couldn't hear the birds. The hammering and drilling got so loud I had to hold my ears. A workman told us how a doe had come here searching for the deer corn that the hunters left, and how the crew had scared her off. No deer here now, for sure. We had to walk and walk to find a green stretch open to the sky. There was a pond, a shiny mirror, full of trees all upside down and water lilies right side up. Conservation land, said Dad, and told how all the land for miles around looked like this one. The fields were dotted with bright wildflowers and scrub pine that the deer could scratch against. I knew they'd like it here. I started pushing through the brush, but then Dad stopped me and we stood all quiet for a while until I said, "There's nothing moving." And Dad said it just seemed that way, how baby birds were opening their beaks, while little foxes tussled in their dens and mother squirrels went scavenging for food. I squinted to look harder for the animals my dad had talked about. I hoped they wouldn't frighten off the deer. My feet began to dance. I swatted at a fly. My throat was dry as sand. Dad told how when there weren't so many folks around, he'd seen a silver fox in the same spot, and how there'd soon be blueberries that we could pick, enough to make a pie. But it wasn't blueberries or foxes that we'd come to find, and even though this waiting was so hard, I knew we had to do it for that deer. I hopped from one foot to the next until I scared 2 rabbits off and had to shut my eyes to make my feet stay still. Then all at once we noticed something moving through the bushes. Branches swiveled side to side. "Hey, look," I whispered, just before I sneezed, and one fat pheasant that we hadn't seen rose up into the air. "I'll bet that bird will tell the deer to stay away," I wailed. "Then we'll go someplace where they won't expect us," said my dad. The sky was changing fast, with yellow patches fading into purple clouds. The wind was cooler. Darkness fell like separate shadows where the sun had shone before. "Should we go back?" I asked just as the lightning cracked and thunder came so close I grabbed Dad's hand. The clouds dumped instant puddles, drenched everything around. The rain was warm. We turned our faces to it and stuck out our tongues. But then it stopped, as quick as it had come. Do deer go out and drink the rain, or do they hide away somewhere and wait? Still dripping, we continued on till Dad stood still. "Look over there," he said, so softly that I almost didn't hear him. and I didn't see a thing. Over where I'm pointing, but don't move. I held my breath until it burned my chest, and I could just make out a white and pointy flag with one beside it. They both twitched. Don't say a word, Dad said. And then I saw her, stepping from the shadows, and she looked at me, then leaped into the air. The little flags bounced too, and I could see they were the tails of 2 small deer. A doe and her 2 fawns, I said, as quietly as I could while trying desperately to keep the 3 in sight until they disappeared into their green world. The long walk home, along the stream, past conservation land, by all the houses being built, then through the marsh and over dunes. I tried to think how I could see that doe and her 2 fawns again. There had to be a way. When Mom came out, I ran to tell her all about the doe and how those twins had twitchy tails. "You're such a lucky boy," she said. But I couldn't seem to tell the rest, so deep inside me that I knew the memory would never leave. The way those deer had suddenly appeared, the way they'd quickly run away, as if they'd come from nowhere, like Dad said, or as if our 2 worlds crossed for just a magic while. The end.